They called her overqualified for community college. That was what Dr. Hargrove saw when he walked into Mercy General's ER on his first day as Chief of Emergency Medicine, a middle-aged woman in scrubs 2 sizes too big, hair pulled back with a drugstore elastic, hands that trembled slightly when she held her coffee mug at the nurse's station. He didn't see the scar tissue along her knuckles from field surgeries without gloves. He didn't see the way she mapped exit routes every time she entered a room, her eyes touching the door, the windows, the emergency crash cart position, the distance from bed to corridor. He didn't see what Nurse Chen whispered to the resident sometimes, that Katie Morrison could start and for in a thrashing meth addict on the first stick, always knew which patients would crash 30 seconds before the monitors alarmed, moved like someone who'd practiced medicine in places where the power went out and you had to work by flashlight. He didn't see the faded unit patch sewn inside her jacket lining, navy blue and gold, that she touched once each shift like a talisman when she thought nobody was watching. He didn't see Senior Chief Petty Officer Morrison, the medic they called Reaper in Tikrit, the one who'd held insurgent fire for 17 minutes while dragging 5 wounded sailors out of a burning MRAP under direct fire. Katie Morrison moves through Mercy General's ER in Houston with practiced invisibility. 3 years of it now. 3 years of fluorescent lights washing out her features, antiseptic smell masking everything, that sharp chemical bite that used to remind her of forward operating bases until she trained herself not to flinch. The cold steel of med carts her only companions most nights. Graveyard shifts that stretched from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., long enough for the nightmares to feel manageable if she stayed moving, stayed useful, stayed quiet. The ER breathes like a living thing at night. Ventilators wheeze their mechanical rhythm in the bays behind her. The monitor in Bay 3 beeps steady, then stutters, then returns to sinus rhythm, that particular sound that means a human heart is still fighting. Katie knows these sounds the way some people know music. She knows them the way she knew the sound of incoming mortar fire in Jalabad, the way she knew the particular pitch of a man going into shock from blood loss. Nurse Chen passes by with a chart, notices Katie can place a central line in a patient whose veins have collapsed from repeated chemo, notices the economy of her movements, nothing wasted, nothing rushed, everything certain. You ever think about getting your RN? Chen asked her once, 3 months into Katie's tenure at Mercy General. Katie had smiled without teeth. I'm fine here, she'd said. Which was the truth and the lie at the same time. She was fine. She was invisible. She was healing. Slowly. Miguel Santos occupies Bay 7, post-op from a laparoscopic appendectomy, former Army medic, still wearing the careful posture of someone whose body remembers what it means to move under fire. He watches Katie work. Really watches. Not the way the residents watch, cataloging her movements to steal technique. He watches the way a soldier watches another soldier, looking for the telltale signs. The way she never quite relaxes her left shoulder. The way her eyes don't stay on her hands when she works, they stay on the patient's face, on the monitor, on the door. Yesterday he'd asked her to adjust his morphine drip because his foot was burning, and she'd caught the problem in 6 seconds, infiltration, not inflammation, and repositioned the line without waking him, and when his eyes opened anyway, the first thing he saw was her hand steady as surgical steel, and something flickered in his expression. Recognition, maybe. Or the ghost of it. Dr. Hargrove arrives on a Tuesday at 7 a.m. sharp. His shoes are Italian leather, the kind that costs more than Katie's monthly rent. His stethoscope is a Littmann Cardiology 4, obsidian black with gold accents, the kind of showpiece that tells you the man has never used it in a place where it mattered. He walks through the ER as if he's already mentally rearranging the furniture, which bay to renovate, which nurses to replace, which protocols are too lenient and require his urgent correction. He is 38, handsome in the way men with unchecked authority are handsome, with the kind of jawline that comes from never being told no and the kind of presence that makes younger residents straighten their posture involuntarily. The chief of medicine introduces him to the day shift. Hargrove nods through the pleasantries, his eyes already scanning, already assessing weakness. Katie is in Bay 6, checking the drain output on a post-op patient, when his attention lands on her like a searchlight. She feels it the way prey feels a predator. That's Katie, Chen says carefully, because Chen already understands something about Hargrove from the way he stands, the way he listens to Chen explain that Katie's been with them 3 years, handles critical cases, never misses anything. Hargrove's smile doesn't reach his eyes. Community college, he asks. No degree. Chen hesitates. She's an exceptional nurse. Hargrove nods as if Chen has confirmed something he already knew. We'll see about that, he says. The words are quiet. The words are a promise. For days later, the Ramirez family arrives via ambulance. Mrs. Elena Ramirez, 63, presenting with fever, hypertension, altered mental status, the whole sepsis picture unraveling in real time. Katie takes her vitals, temperature 103.4, blood pressure 88/54, respiratory rate 24, heart rate 127. The oxygen saturation hovers at 91 on supplemental O2. Katie has seen sepsis 1,000 times. She has treated sepsis in a forward operating base where antibiotics came from a supply line that was interrupted for 6 weeks, where she had to make decisions about who got the limited supplies and who would probably not survive regardless. She knows what sepsis looks like when you're out of options. She knows what it looks like when you're running out of time. The Ramirez family stands in the bay, husband, daughter, son, and Katie can see the fear in their eyes, the particular kind of fear that comes from watching someone you love disappear into their own body. She starts the 4. Large bore, left antecubital fossa, on the first attempt. She orders the labs, lactate, blood cultures, CBC, complete metabolic panel, and she draws them herself because sometimes it matters to move fast, matters to be hands-on. The ER doc on shift is Dr. Marcus Chen, good man, experienced, and he's already moving, already getting Mrs. Ramirez hooked to the monitor, and Katie's about to tell him that they need to get her on the sepsis protocol. 3 hours, that's the window, 3 hours to get antibiotics on board or the mortality climbs like a wall, when Dr. Hargrove appears in the bay. Just appears. Like he's been waiting for this exact moment. I'll take it from here, Hargrove says. He doesn't say it to Dr. Chen. He says it to the room. To the family. To Katie. His voice is the voice of a man accustomed to being the smartest person in every room, and the terrible part is that he probably scored in the top percentile of his medical school class, probably trained at some prestigious program where everyone deferred to him automatically. Katie steps back, that is what she does, has been doing for 3 years, step back, defer, let the doctors have their space and their authority, but something in her chest tightens. Something in her military spine recognizes the pattern. A man with authority, a patient in critical condition, a timeline that doesn't care about hierarchy. We need to start sepsis protocol, Katie says. The words come out careful, deferential. 3-hour window. She's already showing signs of organ dysfunction. The lactate will probably, Hargrove holds up his hand. Not angry. Worse than angry. Patronizing. The kind of gesture that suggests she's a child trying to explain calculus. I'm going to need you to focus on the basics, Katie. Vitals, comfort measures, that sort of thing. The diagnostic reasoning is beyond your scope. Katie feels Dr. Chen tense beside her. He knows what sepsis looks like too. He knows that Hargrove just dismissed the only protocol that actually improves survival rates in septic shock. But Hargrove is the chief now, and the hierarchy is sacred, and nobody argues with the chief in front of the family. Katie takes one measured breath. She holds it for 4 counts, the way she was taught in combat medicine training, the way you breathe when you're under fire and need to stay still. The breath is ice and steel. She exhales. 1 tear escapes, just one, just enough to be visible, and she wipes it away without breaking eye contact. Your protocol will kill someone within a week, she says quietly. And we both know it. The Ramirez family watches this exchange. The husband tightens his arm around his wife. The daughter's eyes go wide. The son shifts, uncomfortable, sensing the power dynamic shift and settle back into place, the doctor elevated, the nurse diminished, the order restored. Hargrove's jaw tightens for just a moment. Just one moment. Then the smile returns, and it is a smile like a shark showing its teeth, and he leans toward Katie and says, very clearly, very precisely, dangerously overconfident for someone with community college credentials. That's what we're talking about here. Dangerous. He turns to the family. His voice becomes warm, concerned, suddenly full of empathy. Mrs. Ramirez is very fortunate that we caught this when we did. I have extensive experience with septic shock. You're in the best possible hands. Katie's hands are steady. Her voice is steady. The trembling, if there is any trembling, exists only in the small muscles under her skin, in the places nobody can see. She steps back. She lets Hargrove order the labs. She lets him order the fluids, only 2 liters, he says. We don't want to overload her, he says, and she watches the numbers on the monitor, and she knows. She knows in the way you know dangerous things when you've trained for them, when you've seen them, when you've fought them and sometimes lost. The lactate will climb. The blood pressure will fall. The patient will deteriorate in exactly the way Hargrove's protocol guarantees. She touches the unit patch through the fabric of her jacket. One touch. A brief prayer to people who probably don't exist anymore, soldiers who probably don't think about her, a version of herself that died in Tikrit and washed up on the shore of civilian life pretending to be somebody harmless. Miguel Santos watches from Bay 7. He sees the whole thing. He sees the way Hargrove operates, the charm, the authority, the public humiliation disguised as medical guidance. He sees the way Katie absorbs it. He sees the single tear. He sees the way she wipes it away without breaking eye contact, and something in his expression changes, hardens, becomes very careful. He has seen that kind of composure before. He has seen it in combat footage. He has seen it in the eyes of people who knew how to survive things most people can't even imagine. The shift continues. Katie works her shift. She checks on Mrs. Ramirez every 15 minutes, watches the lactate climb from 2.8 to 3.1 to 3.5, watches the blood pressure drift downward despite the fluids Hargrove ordered, watches the slow deterioration that protocol errors guarantee. She says nothing. She does her job. She provides comfort measures, as Hargrove instructed. She provides them with hands that have held lives together in the rubble of buildings, with hands that know the difference between routine medicine and crisis. But that wasn't the worst part. That wasn't the thing that made her breath catch in her throat as she drove home at 7:30 a.m. with the Houston summer heat already climbing toward 98 degrees and the radio playing some song about resilience that felt like a knife. The worst part was that Hargrove was right about one thing. He was the chief now. He controlled the protocols. He controlled the hierarchy. And in a system that depended on that hierarchy, there was no mechanism for a nurse with community college credentials to stop him, to protect a patient, to do anything but watch and absorb and take it. Just a nurse. That was all she was allowed to be. That was all she'd chosen to be. The question that kept her awake when she finally got home was whether that choice was still available to her, or whether someone like Hargrove, someone who saw weakness and exploited it, someone who turned authority into weapon, would force her to become something else entirely. The college student in Bay 4 was dying. His right lung had collapsed, the pressure building inside his chest like a bomb counting down to detonation. Trachea deviated left. Jugular veins bulging purple against his neck. Respirations at 38 and climbing toward the ceiling. The on-call resident stood 3 feet away, still wrestling with his second glove, his movements carrying the hesitation of someone who'd never seen this particular death spiral before. Katie saw it in the space between one breath and the next. She moved before the resident had finished gloving. The supply shortage meant no sterile field kit, no fancy equipment, just a 14-gauge catheter needle and her hand steady as a surgical laser. She positioned him supine. Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, muscle memory taking over, her body remembering protocols written in blood across 3 tours of a place called Tikrit where field surgeons worked fast or watched people die. The needle advanced through skin, through the thin membrane between ribs, until she felt the resistance give way like a sigh of surrender. The hiss of escaping air cut through the room like a scream. Pressure released, Color began returning to the kid's face. O2 saturation climbing, 68, 72, 79, 85. Sinus rhythm holding steady on the monitor. The resident stared at her over his half-raised hands, his mouth moving without words, processing what he'd just witnessed. Katie withdrew the needle with the same precision she'd used inserting it. She taped the catheter in place. Professional. Clean. Efficient. Not a tremor. Not a pause. Just a former senior chief petty officer doing what she'd been trained to do before the Navy became a ghost she carried in her chest instead of a name on a uniform. But that wasn't the worst part. Miguel Santos watched from his wheelchair parked beside the nurse's station, post-op day 3, his leg wrapped in compression bandages and his eyes narrowed with the particular recognition of a man who'd spent 5 years as an army medic. He'd seen a lot in his time: combat trauma, field expedients, the brutal grace of people who knew their bodies like weapons. But what he saw in that bay transcended technique. When Katie emerged, Miguel was waiting. She rolled her med cart toward the corridor and his voice found her like a question she couldn't ignore. "I've only seen field surgeons work that fast," he said quietly. "You serve." Katie's hand froze on the med cart for half a heartbeat. Just half. A quarter second of hesitation that most people wouldn't catch, but Miguel Santos wasn't most people. His eyes held the flat certainty of someone who'd been close enough to death to recognize her as a kindred spirit. "No," she said flatly. She kept walking. Didn't slow. Didn't turn. Didn't offer the kind of explanation that truth-telling requires. The lie tasted like copper on her tongue, like the smell of diesel fuel and iodine that had become the permanent undertone of her blood. Miguel watched her disappear around the corner, and something in his expression shifted, not disbelief, but recognition of the sacred silence between veterans who understand that some histories are classified even from themselves. He picked up his phone that afternoon and made a call to a buddy still active duty. The kind of call you make when you've spotted something that doesn't belong in a civilian hospital, something that moves through the world with purpose and restraint. He didn't say much. Just a name. A description. Check if she's still in the system. By evening, Miguel knew exactly who Katie Morrison had been, which meant he knew exactly what she'd chosen to stop being. The break room on Unit 7 had become a geography of abandonment. Katie entered it the next day during her 2 p.m. break, having worked through lunch to avoid the ritual that had begun 5 days earlier. The microwave hummed its steady mechanical pulse. The refrigerator clicked and wheezed in the corner like a creature laboring to breathe. She was reaching for her lunch when Nurse Rodriguez looked up from his sandwich, made eye contact, and stood. Not slowly. Deliberately. Deliberately enough that Nurse Patel followed within seconds, dumping his own half-eaten meal into the trash with a wet slap. Within 90 seconds, Katie sat alone at a table still warm from abandoned bodies. This pattern repeated across 6 days. A study in social physics. The room was never crowded when she entered and she was never alone for long. It was the kind of coordinated ostracism that requires no explicit instruction, just the understanding that Dr. Hargrove had spoken, and the hospital hierarchy had responded like a synchronized mechanism. Nurses who'd once asked her opinion on difficult cases now moved past her without acknowledgement. The young LPN who'd borrowed her stethoscope last month suddenly needed a different one. Katie absorbed it like she'd absorbed everything else. One measured breath. Professional deportment. The knowledge that flinching would give Hargrove exactly what he wanted, evidence of her breaking, proof that hierarchy had teeth and that queens of community college nursing had no place challenging physicians with actual degrees. She brought her lunch from home now instead of risking the refrigerator. She took her breaks in the supply closet instead of the break room. She became a ghost moving through her own workplace. But ghosts still had to clock in, and that meant the nurse's station, and that meant the moment she'd been avoiding since Hargrove had begun his campaign of strategic humiliation. The disciplinary notice appeared on the unit board during shift change, posted in red ink like a sentence carved into wood. Katie's name centered at the top in letters that left no ambiguity: Katie Morrison, written warning for insubordination and failure to respect physician judgment. Further violations will result in immediate termination. Hargrove's signature sprawled across the bottom in the aggressive penmanship of someone who'd learned to sign things as a weapon. He'd timed it perfectly. 15 nurses watched her read it. 15 sets of eyes measuring her response, cataloguing whether she'd show anger, shame, or the kind of broken resignation that confirms hierarchy is real and power matters. Katie's eyes moved across the words without emotion. She didn't touch the paper. She didn't breathe harder. She simply turned and walked back to her patients, her posture unchanged, her face carrying the particular flatness of someone who'd survived far worse than a public humiliation from a man threatened by her competence. What she didn't see was Hargrove's expression as he watched her read it, the intensity in his jaw, the calculation in his eyes. He'd gotten no reaction. That was the problem. His power should have made her flinch. His authority should have broken something. Instead, she'd absorbed the public shaming like a combat veteran absorbs incoming fire, as information to be processed and filed away, not as damage to be mourned. That night, sitting in his office with the door closed and the city lights bleeding through the window, Hargrove opened his laptop. He began drafting emails. To his former residency director on the hospital board. To colleagues at the Texas Board of Nursing. To the hospital's outside investigator. He was done with strategic moves. He was beginning to see that Katie Morrison was the kind of threat that required not just demotion but erasure, and he possessed the institutional architecture to make erasure possible. The room went so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights hum. Day 6 of Hargrove's new sepsis protocol began like any other morning at Mercy General, fluorescent lights humming their mechanical lullaby, the ER smell that never quite washed out, antiseptic layered over stale coffee and something underneath that Katie had learned not to name. She'd been working in that hospital for 3 years, and her hands had memorized every corner of it, the supply closet with the wobbly door, the way Bay 4's monitor stood 3 inches higher than the others, the precise angle needed to thread a central line without striking the clavicle. This morning, she kept her head down. The break room had become hostile territory. Yesterday, she'd watched 2 nurses rise simultaneously when she sat down, their half-eaten lunches abandoned like crime scenes. She'd simply nodded and moved to the staff bathroom instead. Miguel Santos was still upstairs in post-op recovery. She hadn't seen him since their conversation about her hands, about what they could do. That was fine. Some secrets were safer buried. The charge nurse, Patricia, pulled her aside at 7:15 a.m. Bayfer just rolled in. 22-year-old college student. He's coding. Katie was already moving, her muscle memory ahead of her conscious mind. Patricia handed her the vital sheet. Respiratory distress. Oxygen saturation dropping, 88, now 85. Unilateral breath sounds on the left. The trachea was deviating. Jugular veins distended like rope beneath transparent skin. Tension pneumothorax. Collapsed right lung. Air pressure compressing the heart. The kid had maybe 4 minutes before cardiac arrest became irreversible. The on-call resident, Dr. Fletcher, was still scrubbing his hands outside Bay 4 when Katie walked through the doors. She didn't ask permission. She didn't announce what she was doing. The resident was competent but slow, the kind of doctor who relied on protocols instead of instinct, which meant he relied on time they didn't have. 20 seconds to gown. 20 more to glove. 40 seconds Katie's patient didn't have. 14-gauge angiocatheter. Now. Her voice wasn't a request. It was a command. A respiratory tech froze. No one had heard Katie give direct orders before. In 3 years, she'd asked. Suggested. Deferred. The timid nurse who nodded and obeyed. That person didn't exist in this moment. The catheter was in her hand. She'd already identified the landmark, second intercostal space, midclavicular line on the right side, the exposed airway entrance where the needle would release the trapped air and let the lung re-expand. The kid's eyes were rolling back. His peripheral oxygen saturation had dropped to 79%. The heart monitor showed tachycardia so severe the beeps were running together like a single continuous scream. She didn't hesitate. She didn't steady her breath. Her hands moved the way they had moved in Tikrit when the mortar round had collapsed the clinic roof and 2 of her corpsmen were pinned beneath the concrete. She'd worked in the dust then too, with worse light and worse equipment and the sound of gunfire close enough that she could taste the cordite. The needle penetrated skin, ribs, pleura. The hiss of air escaping. A long, mechanical wheeze as trapped pressure released from the collapsed lung. The kid's oxygen saturation climbed instantly, 79, 82, 87. The monitor's terrible racing rhythm began to slow. His eyes focused. His breathing deepened. Dr. Fletcher had his gloves on now. He stared at the decompressed pneumothorax and at Katie standing with an empty catheter in her hand, her composure unchanged, her expression flat as a closed door. "I'll tube him," Fletcher said quietly. "Size for .0 endotracheal tube. Get a chest X-ray. Left side only. He's stable enough for imaging." Katie set down the catheter and stepped back, her voice dropping back to its careful, measured tone. But something had shifted in the room. Something had become visible that couldn't be unseen. The college student was alive because Katie Morrison had moved faster than fear. Because her hands remembered things her mind was working very hard to forget. By 11 a.m., word had reached the 3rd floor. By noon, it had reached administration. By 1:15 p.m., Katie's phone buzzed with a message from Patricia: "Hargrove wants you in his office. Now." She walked through the ER one last time. Her last time for 3 years, she didn't know that yet, but her body did. Veterans of the body always know. The fluorescent light seemed brighter. The antiseptic smell seemed sharper. She passed Miguel Santos's bay and found him asleep, his heart monitor steady at 68 beats per minute, sinus rhythm, the good kind of silence. Hargrove's office was on the 4th floor. The elevator ride took 90 seconds. She used them to breathe. 1 inhale for 4 counts. Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. A technique they'd taught her at Dam Neck back when she was training to keep people alive in places where staying alive was a luxury. The door opened onto a version of Hargrove she hadn't seen before. He was on the phone. Not speaking, listening. His jaw was tight. His knuckles were white against the receiver. He was hearing things that made his face go the color of old bone. When he hung up, he didn't look at her. He looked at his desk instead. "Sit down," he said. Katie didn't sit. That was the first violation. That was when she stopped being the deferential woman who accepted correction and became something Hargrove had never encountered before, someone who refused to perform submission anymore. "What's this about?" 10 words or fewer. "Calm." The voice she used now was dropping in pitch, hardening in tone. "What's this about?" He laughed, a sound with no humor in it, like breaking glass inside a steel box. "You performed an invasive procedure in direct violation of a written protocol I distributed 3 days ago. Every nurse at this hospital received it. Every nurse understood it. No invasive procedures without physician supervision." He was quoting from memory. He had memorized the exact words of his own order because he was already thinking about how he'd defend them. "You directly undermined my authority. In front of a resident. In front of the entire Bay 4 team. The patient was in cardiac decompensation." Katie's voice was steady as surgical steel. "Decompression was the only intervention that prevented death. You don't get to make that decision." His face was changing color now, red, deepening, the trembling of a man realizing he'd grabbed something that was burning his hand. "You're a nurse. You follow protocol. You wait for a physician." The physician wasn't fast enough. For words. That was all she'd say. That was all she needed to say. Hargrove stood. For a moment, just a moment, she saw him calculate whether he could intimidate her by standing, by using his height, by the physical presence that intimidated most people in this building. Then he saw her eyes. And whatever he read there made him sit back down. "I've already made calls," he said. His voice had changed. It was smaller now. The voice of someone who had activated defenses he knew weren't going to hold. "To Dr. Castellan at the board. To the Texas Board of Nursing. To an HR investigator who's going to interview every single nurse you've ever contradicted or corrected. I'm citing falsified credentials, practicing beyond your scope, and creating a hostile work environment through insubordination." Katie felt nothing. That was the strange part, the part that would stay with her later, the part that would prove what she really was. She felt the fluorescent lights humming overhead. She felt the air conditioning against her skin. She felt nothing. "I'm putting you on administrative leave effective immediately. Your badge is being deactivated at the security desk. We'll discuss termination at a formal hearing in 2 weeks. Your locker will be emptied by end of shift. You'll collect your belongings from HR on your way out." He didn't fire her. He couldn't fire her officially yet. But he was ending her. The mechanism was already moving. Hargrove had made the calls while she was saving a life. He'd been on the phone with allies while his patient's oxygen saturation was climbing back toward normal. He'd been planning this before the kid had even been extubated. That was institutional power. That was what she was up against. The walk to the ER security desk took 45 seconds. 60 steps. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was steady. The badge that had opened every door at Mercy General for 3 years was processed through a system and rendered inert, a piece of plastic with no function, no access, no authority. By 2:44 p.m., her locker was empty. The contents fit in a cardboard box, her personal stethoscope, the faded jacket with the unit patch sewn inside the lining, 3 protein bars she kept for 12-hour shifts, a photo of her daughter Emma, taken last year before Emma had figured out that something in her mother's history didn't add up. Before she'd started asking questions. Before she'd started searching. Katie walked out of Mercy General ER through the same sliding doors she'd entered 3 years ago, carrying the box like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The Houston heat hit her like a wall, thick and wet and suffocating. It was 104 degrees. The parking lot shimmered. Her truck was parked in row E, and she drove it home in complete silence, radio off, windows up despite the heat, because sound felt like an intrusion. What she didn't know was that Miguel Santos had already made a call from his hospital room. That the call had gone to a number that wasn't supposed to exist. That on the other end of the line, in a JSOC command center in Fort Bragg, a special operations commander had read Miguel's name and Katie's name in the same sentence and said, "That's impossible. Send me everything you have." What she didn't know was that the silence was ending. That her 3 years of anonymous peace were over. That within 4 days, something was going to walk through the doors of Mercy General Emergency Medicine that would change every institution that thought they understood power. The call started at 11:02 a.m. Dr. Hargrove sat in his office on the 4th floor, door closed, phone pressed to his ear with the kind of pressure that suggested he was trying to crush something. His former residency director at Johns Hopkins picked up on the second ring, they always did. Old debts. Old loyalties. The kind that money couldn't buy but institutional hierarchy could leverage like a crowbar. "She's a liability," Hargrove said, his voice smooth as oil on water. "Protocol violator. Performs invasive procedures without physician supervision. Community college credentials trying to practice like she's board certified. I need documentation. I need witnesses. I need her gone before she kills someone." The director listened. Hargrove could picture him, silver-haired, corner office, the kind of man who still believed that hierarchy meant something. That the letter after your name on a diploma mattered more than what your hands could do under pressure. By 12:15 p.m., Hargrove had filed a formal complaint with the Texas Board of Nursing. Not an email. A printed document, notarized, citing dangerous practice beyond scope, outdated certifications, failure to maintain physician-nurse hierarchy, and reckless independent decision-making that violates established protocol. He'd learned long ago that documentation was a weapon with a sharper edge than any scalpel. Paper trails were permanent. Paper trails were unassailable. The outside HR investigator arrived by 1:56 p.m., a woman with a clipboard and the kind of neutral expression that meant she'd already decided which way the wind was blowing. Hargrove had selected her carefully. She'd worked for 3 hospitals before this one, each exit leaving a trail of terminated employees who'd never quite managed to prove wrongdoing. She was competent. She was ruthless. She was exactly what he needed. The investigator began systematically interviewing every nurse Katie had ever corrected, ever disagreed with, ever made uncomfortable by knowing more than they did. There was Amanda from day shift, who'd misplaced a 12-lead EKG cable. There was Derek, who'd missed a subtle sign of sepsis in a patient Katie had flagged. There was Jennifer, who'd simply never liked being questioned. The investigator took notes with the precision of someone building a case that would hold in court. By 2:07 p.m., hospital security appeared at the ER with a cardboard box and Katie's deactivated badge. The walk of shame, though Katie didn't seem to understand that yet. Her locker, emptied in front of 3 witnesses, scrubs, compression socks, the stethoscope her father had given her, a half-empty container of antacids, a photo of Emma from 3 years ago that Katie had never taken down. Everything reduced to cardboard. Everything rendered temporary. Katie drove home in silence. The radio played something cheerful about summer and beaches and things that felt impossibly distant. She parked in the driveway at 2:34 p.m., still in her street clothes because she'd never gotten around to changing into scrubs that morning, too focused on defending her clinical judgment, too focused on surviving another shift under Hargrove's increasingly elaborate campaign of destruction. She sat at the kitchen table at 2:51 p.m. The afternoon light came through the window at exactly the angle that made dust particles visible, floating, purposeless, suspended in brightness. The cardboard box sat on the tile beside her. Her hands rested flat on the table. She didn't cry. Not yet. The trembling came first, the kind of trembling that starts in your chest and radiates outward, muscular memory of adrenaline with nowhere to go. Her breathing was controlled, tactical, the kind of breathing that keeps you alive in spaces where panic means death. That college kid had been alive because of her. O2 sat at 89 when security arrived. 89, not 92, not 88. 89, a number that meant the kid's lungs had stopped doing their job, that air was pooling in his chest cavity where it should have been inflating tissue, that gravity and pressure and the laws of physics were actively trying to kill him. She'd known, the way she'd always known, exactly where to put the needle. Second intercostal space. Midclavicular line. 14-gauge catheter. One smooth motion. The hiss of air. The pressure releasing like a sigh from the chest cavity, and the monitor climbing. 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 91, 94. 96, the kid's color changing from slate gray to something approaching human. She'd saved him. She'd performed an emergency procedure that violated Hargrove's written protocol, and she'd saved that kid's life. And now she was sitting at her kitchen table at 2:16 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon, unemployed, her career cremated on administrative paperwork, her hands shaking in a way she hadn't allowed herself to shake since Tikrit. I saved him, she whispered to the empty kitchen. I saved him. The words didn't make sense. They weren't supposed to. Nothing made sense anymore. 3 years of quiet. 3 years of rebuilding herself into someone unremarkable, someone invisible, someone who could fade into the background of an ER and help people without being seen. 3 years of silence. And then one college kid with a collapsing lung, one moment of recognition from Miguel Santos, one protocol violation, and everything disintegrated. The front door opened at 2:51 p.m. Emma came in first, phone in hand, still in her school uniform, khakis and a polo shirt with the academy logo. 14 had turned into 15 over the summer, and Katie had missed most of it because of double shifts and overtime and the increasingly careful choreography of avoiding Dr. Hargrove in the hallways. Emma stopped when she saw her mother at the table, the afternoon light hitting Katie's face in a way that made her look older than she should, worn in a way that 15-year-olds don't know how to recognize. Mom. Emma's voice shifted into a register that meant something was wrong. "Why are you home? Are you sick?" Katie couldn't answer. The words existed somewhere, but they weren't connected to her mouth. She was still sitting in Bay 4, hands moving with their own logic, the needle sliding in, the pressure releasing, the monitor responding like a living thing finally able to breathe again. Emma set her backpack on the kitchen island with the deliberate slowness of someone approaching something dangerous. "Mom. What happened?" It wasn't a request. It was a statement. 15-year-olds learn to read their mothers the way soldiers learn to read terrain. Katie's eyes were fixed on some point that wasn't in the kitchen. Her hands were flat on the table, palms down, the kind of still that comes from terrified muscles locked in place. Emma's phone was still in her hand. She'd Googled it that morning in her first period study hall. Just typed the words into the search bar out of simple teenage curiosity and learned things about her mother that didn't align with anything in her lived experience. A faded unit patch. Sewn inside a jacket lining. Hidden the way people hide shameful things or precious things or things too dangerous to carry openly. Senior Chief Petty Officer Catherine J.R. Morrison. Navy Special Warfare Combat Medic. Call sign, Reaper. Reaper. The word had meant nothing to Emma until the Google results started appearing, each one more unsettling than the last. Declassified combat records. News articles from 2012 about an ambush in Tikrit. A military database entry. An obituary for someone named Julio Romero, a young man from San Antonio, and a quote from an unidentified service member saying Senior Chief Morrison pulled him out herself, under direct fire, with half her team pinned down. Nobody gets left. Nobody. Emma had closed the browser immediately. She hadn't asked. She'd gone to school. She'd thought about it in every class, at lunch, during volleyball practice, and now her mother was sitting at the kitchen table at 2:53 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon, whispering to empty air about saving someone, and Emma suddenly understood that her mother had been someone else before Emma was even born. Someone capable of things that the woman sitting at this table seemed incapable of even comprehending in this moment. "Mom." Emma's voice was smaller now. "Talk to me." Katie's eyes focused. They focused on her daughter the way a targeting system locks onto something previously invisible. The recognition was slow. Painful. Like surfacing from deep water where the pressure had been so complete that going back to normal atmosphere felt like drowning in reverse. "They fired me," Katie said. The words came out like they tasted like metal. "Administrative leave. Badge deactivated. Hargrove filed complaints. Board of Nursing. He's calling everyone." Emma sat down across from her mother. She didn't let go of her phone. Inside her jacket pocket, her fingers closed around the unit patch she'd stolen that morning, faded blue fabric with a trident and an anchor and words that meant something about Navy and something about special warfare, and underneath it all a call sign printed in letters that had probably never been meant to be read by a daughter who just wanted her mom to come home at normal hours and ask about her day at school. Outside, the afternoon hummed with the ordinary sound of a neighborhood at midday. A neighbor's lawn mower. A car passing on the street. Wind moving through the trees. Normal. Safe. The kind of peace Katie had spent 3 years trying to inhabit, and the kind of peace that was about to end because in 4 days, something was going to walk through the automatic doors of Mercy General Emergency Medicine with a gun and a voice full of rage, and Katie was going to find out that you don't get to bury who you are. You don't get to hide what your hands know. You don't get to be both invisible and the person everyone remembers when the world breaks. For days. That was all it took for Katie Morrison to decide she couldn't accept the final paycheck sitting in accounting without looking Dr. Hargrove in the face one last time. Not to confront him. Not even to speak. Just to let him see that firing her hadn't broken the thing he'd tried to destroy. Emma insisted on coming along, riding in the passenger seat of Katie's 2019 Honda Civic with her backpack at her feet and a question burning behind her eyes. She'd found the unit patch that morning, faded navy fabric with an anchor and trident, sewn into the lining of Katie's jacket so deliberately that no mother accidentally stitches something that carefully. Emma had Googled the call sign. Reaper. Navy Special Warfare. Combat Medic. She'd spent the last 4 days watching her mother move through their house like a woman wearing a mask that no longer fit, each movement sharper now, more precise, the casual way she'd moved before erased like a draft overwritten. When Katie pulled into the Mercy General parking lot at 2:33 p.m. on a Thursday, the sun hammering down on concrete and making the asphalt shimmer like disturbed water, neither of them knew that the next 4 minutes would end everything Katie had spent 3 years building. They walked through the automatic doors into the ER waiting room, and that was when the man in the tactical vest came through the triage entrance like something summoned. 6'5", maybe 6'6", his frame filling the corridor the way a storm fills a sky. The vest was black mole gear, expensive, the kind of thing that meant this wasn't rage, it was preparation. His right hand gripped a Glock 19, the barrel pointed down but ready, his left hand trembling with the specific violence of a man who'd already decided what he was going to do. The waiting room had maybe 12 people scattered across plastic chairs, an elderly woman with a wrapped ankle, a young father holding a feverish toddler, a homeless man with a bandaged head, and they all froze the moment they saw the gun. The man's voice came out like gravel in a disposal. Where is he? Where's the doctor who let her die? Security was 40 feet away. The man was 6 feet from the triage desk, 6 feet from Emma, 6 feet from Katie, whose hands were already moving before her conscious mind caught up with her muscle memory. The vault door in her chest opened. The woman who'd been pretending to be ordinary for 3 years stepped back, and the woman who'd kept 5 people alive in a burning MRAP stepped forward. Katie moved like water finding a crack, her angle of approach designed to keep the man's weapon pointed away from the waiting room, away from Emma. She didn't run. She didn't shout. She just moved with the terrifying fluid precision of someone who'd practiced this exact scenario 200 times in a basement beneath Camp Coronado. Her right hand pivoted his right elbow inward, collapsing the joint lock, her left hand already controlling his wrist, already rotating the weapon free. His body moved exactly where she needed it to move, forward momentum redirected downward, his right leg sweeping out of position, his center of gravity falling toward the tile. She took him down in a descending spiral that moved so fast the waiting room saw a blur of vest and flesh and the gun suddenly empty in her hands. He hit the floor face first and lay there sobbing, his shoulder wrenched into a submission position that screamed without sound, his body folded into angles that meant fighting back would snap something vital. Katie kept her grip iron calm, one knee positioned to keep him still, the Glock held with the barrel toward the floor and her finger indexed outside the trigger guard, standard low ready, the kind of thing her hands knew better than her own name. Her breathing was steady. Her voice came out flat, borderline conversational, security is here now. Stay down. Do not move. The man was crying, great heaving sobs that came from a place beyond rage, beyond fear. He was grieving, she realized. He'd come here to destroy the man who destroyed him. For seconds had cost him that choice. Miguel Santos was in his wheelchair by the vending machines, recovering from abdominal surgery, waiting for discharge paperwork when the man came through. Miguel watched the takedown unfold with the speed of someone recognizing something impossible. Katie's hands. Her angle of approach. The way she controlled the weapon and the man simultaneously, the way her breathing never changed, the way her eyes didn't show fear or anger or triumph, just processing. Tactical. Predatory in the specific way that separates soldiers from civilians. Miguel's mouth opened. One word escaped like recognition of a ghost, Reaper. It hung in the air. Katie's hands didn't waver. She didn't acknowledge it. But Emma heard it. Emma's phone was in her hand because Emma was 17 and had been recording to prove to her mother that people could see her value, and she'd captured the takedown on video, and now she was staring at her mother, at the woman she'd thought she understood, and the word Reaper was still echoing off the tile and fluorescent lights. She looked down at her backpack. The unit patch was right there, in her jacket pocket where she'd put it that morning, the one she'd been carrying for 4 days while her mother claimed to be a nurse. Her voice came out in a stammer, her reading of the patch loud enough for the whole waiting room to hear, Senior Chief Petty Officer Morrison. Navy Special Warfare Combat Medic. The CEO of Mercy General arrived within the hour, summoned by hospital security before Katie had even been asked to release the gunman to police custody. Local news cameras arrived 15 minutes later, tipped off by someone in administration. Katie would never know if it was intentional or if the truth had simply found its own way out. Hargrove came down to the ER lobby with the CEO, and Katie watched his face collapse in real time when a Navy SEAL commander's voice appeared on speakerphone, summoned through Katie's identification and emergency contacts. The commander's words came out like a benediction read in reverse: Senior Chief Morrison has 2 bronze stars. The waiting room went dead silent. A Purple Heart. Hargrove's jaw tightened. He understood now. He understood exactly who he'd tried to destroy. And a Navy Cross for pulling 5 sailors from a burning MIP under direct fire in Tikrit. That was 2017. That woman standing in front of you has more combat medical training in her hands than your entire surgical department combined. An FBI liaison was there too. Katie learned later that Miguel had started making calls from his recovery room, that her name had flagged in a Pentagon database for reasons classified 3 levels above Hargrove's security clearance, that she'd provided critical medical intelligence for a 2019 hostage rescue operation that saved the lives of 4 Americans. The liaison confirmed it while Hargrove listened. Ms. Morrison's service record has been verified. The Texas Board of Nursing investigation has been closed with our recommendation. Her record is clear. The hospital board chair read the termination statement on the main lobby tile, surrounded by local news cameras and the specific gravity of institutional consequence. Dr. Hargrove's employment at Mercy General was terminated effective immediately for targeted harassment, abuse of authority, and actions detrimental to patient care and hospital reputation. He tried to argue, "You can't, I have a contract," but his voice had already become irrelevant. Security escorted him out through the same doors Katie had been walked through for days earlier. His expensive shoes made no sound on the tile. His former residency director wasn't returning his calls. Political liability smells like desperation, and Hargrove reeked of it. Katie was offered full reinstatement, back pay covering the 4 days, and a formal written apology from the hospital administration. She declined all of it. Her voice came out in the register she used now, authoritative, measured, the voice of someone who'd made peace with a decision: "I came here to heal. This place is finished for me." Emma took her hand. The SEAL commander on speaker offered her a position in tactical medicine training at Coronado, teaching young combat medics how to think under fire, how to make decisions that save lives when everything's collapsing. Katie didn't answer immediately. She didn't need to. They both already knew what she'd decide. 6 months later, Katie pulled into a Houston strip mall parking lot for Emma's orthodontist appointment, and there was Hargrove. Sitting at a folding table under a banner reading Hargrove Insurance Solutions, cheap business cards fanned in front of him, talking to an elderly couple who looked skeptical. He'd gained weight. His expensive shoes were scuffed now, the leather dull. Katie parked and watched for 30 seconds, no longer, no shorter. Emma noticed her staring. "Is that him?" Katie nodded. "You want to go in?" Katie shook her head. She didn't drive away yet, though. Miguel's words were still clear in her memory: Reaper never missed, and Reaper never forgot. But Reaper didn't need to miss anymore. Reaper had already won. Katie had accepted the position at Coronado. She was teaching young combat medics the difference between textbook medicine and keeping someone alive when everything was on fire. Emma wore the faded unit patch on her backpack now, sewn on with careful stitches that matched her mother's hands. Katie started the car. She didn't look back at the strip mall or the man sitting at the folding table trying to sell insurance to people who would never understand what he'd destroyed, or what had destroyed him. "You know what I learned in Tikrit," she told Emma as they pulled out of the parking lot, heading toward the base, heading toward the work that matters. Emma turned to her. Katie kept her eyes on the road. "You do not need a badge or a gun to be a warrior. If you found this story powerful, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next one. These stories of quiet strength and invisible sacrifice matter, they deserve to be heard. Drop a comment below, Have you ever underestimated someone only to discover they were far more powerful than you realized? I want to hear your stories.